Hi, welcome to Rainbow Space Magic Con 2.0, and this is the Writing for Bisexual and Pansexual Characters panel. It is an Own Voices panel. Let's go ahead and we're just going to move across my screen. Steve, can you introduce yourself and tell us about you?
Sure. So I'm Steve Turnbull. I write in a wide range of genres: thrillers, action adventure, crime, and erotica. And all of those are in science fiction, fantasy, and steampunk settings. My plots are varied, but they tend to involve alienation, found family, and usually often with a romantic subplot. I'm bisexual. I came very late to that realization, only 4 years ago. I always knew there was something missing. And my lead character is almost always female, queer, and non-Caucasian, maybe a combination of those. And I've published a lot of books.
Alrighty, and A.M. Leibowitz.
I'm Ames Leibowitz, writing as A.M. Leibowitz. I usually write contemporary fiction, sometimes contemporary romance, and now my upcoming novel is actually contemporary fantasy. So this is kind of a first for me. I write a range of queer characters. Typically they are bisexual or pansexual, but I have also written a variety of other orientations. Many times they are non-binary. I am as well. My pronouns are they and them, and I'm actually wearing them on my t-shirt today. My t-shirt says they, them, there, and it's in bisexual colors. So
Awesome.
Yeah. I prefer to see the B represented. So, and I also like to represent pansexual people. So almost always my main characters are bi or pan. Sometimes they come to that realization along the way in the story, and they don't always come to that realization after thinking they were heterosexual. So I sometimes write from the other angle. I did not come out until I was in my late 30s. So I also like to, I actually like to prefer, honestly, to write people who have sort of just, that's always been a part of their life, because I kind of wish it had been part of mine. So that's where I am right now. I've written a number of books, mostly through supposed crimes, and some through Beaten Track Publishing, and some collections of short works that originally appeared on my blog or in other places are self-published.
Thank you. And Chloe.
Yeah, my name is Chloe Spencer. I am bisexual. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a writer, screenwriter, and game developer. Last year, I published my debut novel, Duality, which is a sci-fi novel, and I typically tend to write a lot of realistic fiction and sci-fi. I'm hoping to eventually get into fantasy, but right now I'm in the middle of writing my upcoming YA novel called Monster Sona, which is about a girl who turns into a giant monster. So I'm really excited about that one. Yeah.
And last but least, I guess, I am E.M. Hamill, Lisa Hamill, and I write the Dali Tamarea missions series with a non-binary lead character. I guess they're technically pansexual because they love beings and humans, not necessarily any particular order. I also write for 9 Star Press and for Starbarred Books, which is my own imprint. And I am also bisexual and came to it late, kind of like the rest of us did, it sounds like. So, but glad to be the authentic me finally. So, all right, well, let's get started here. So we kind of talked throughout the week about what the kinds of things we would like to, oh, I think we lost Steve. We might have to get him back here in a minute. We kind of talked about what we would like to discuss in regard to writing bi and pan characters. And we kind of definitely want to address the positive, but there unfortunately are some negatives. And so let's start with the challenges we see as writing bi and as writing as bi and pan authors? What kind of things do we see as a challenge? Anybody want to address that?
Yeah, I actually had a pretty good example of this. This wasn't necessarily in writing fiction, but in screenwriting, I wrote a LGBT script. It's like a realistic drama about it was like two teenage mothers who meet up at a support group and they raise their children together, and then they later like fall in love. So it was like a rom-com. It was like a romantic drama. And like some of the feedback that I got on this competition was that they felt like more like roommates than anything else. And I think the thing that was weird about that was that it feels like a lot of the times when you're writing bisexual characters, or even maybe like characters that are kind of coming into their sexuality, maybe at a later stage in life, there's a huge pressure to be able to put them on the screen in sexual kind of situations.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me is kind of frustrating as a writer, because, you can have characters who are inexperienced that maybe aren't ready for that kind of thing. And that's completely valid. You don't need to have sex with another person to be considered like bisexual or pansexual. And also like it can be acephobic in a way, or not inclusive towards people who are asexual. So I think that that's what I encounter a lot of the time, is there's definitely this pressure to prove the sexuality on the page. And it generally, for whatever reason, in the script that I wrote, they were shown like holding hands, they were kissing, they shared the same bed at different points, and yet still I got feedback that said they feel like roommates more than anything else. And it kind of made me also think about the ways, specifically with women, how like sometimes those relationships have a tendency to be infantilized or not taken very seriously. And it kind of also makes me think about the ways in which bisexuality is kind of considered I don't think that this person who wrote the feedback for that script was intending to be biphobic, but it definitely felt like they were maybe thinking of bisexuality as like a phase, like kind of in the back of their mind. Because if, they loved each other, and if they're truly queer, like, why aren't they just having sex? Which I find very strange, and definitely kind of the hardest thing that I encounter in my work.
Right.
Chloe, I almost had to laugh at the whole, they felt like roommates, just gals being pals.
I was like, I keep reading that feedback, and it still just doesn't make sense to me, like, months after the fact. And, the first draft of that script is very, very bad. So I understand like some of the other feedback that they had for it, but I feel like there's definitely this weird kind of space for bisexuals in the community where we're constantly being expected to prove. And a lot of that has to do with like intercourse and things like that, which is deeply uncomfortable, for those of us who are inexperienced or maybe are just otherwise uninterested in that sort of thing.
Just to piggyback off that, because I feel that too, like there's this, you have to prove on page that your character is bisexual. So how do you do that? Well, there's the pressure to have them have sex, but it's all this damned if you do, damned if you don't. So if your characters had actually been intimate with each other, if they had sex, if they had not come across as gal pals,
Right.
then you would have gotten but they're really just lesbians. And if you show people on page in relationships with multiple genders, then it becomes, why did you put that heterosexuality in my gay book? Exactly. And it's just, like I ran across that I've written polyamory. So then I become a bad bisexual because I'm representing people who must have multiple partners of different genders. And, it's just headache inducing. I just want to write my freaking bisexual characters. And if you don't like them, that's not on me. That is on you, that you don't understand.
Right. And Steve, what's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I have 4 bisexual characters in my books, various books. 2 of those are erotica, so yeah, they're having sex, so whatever. Actually, no, 3 of them, but anyway, the 4th one, which is actually the main character in one series, yeah, she doesn't have sex with people. She's attracted to anybody, anybody that she's attracted to. It doesn't have to be male, female, whatever gender, it doesn't matter. But yeah, why does it doesn't come across, frankly. I'm sure it was a very big surprise when in the fourth book she jumped on a lady. She was, yeah, anyway. So, but also they're crime books. So, you know, sex is not necessarily the most important thing going on there. So, yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say that I think the important thing too for us is we're telling a story about people, not necessarily telling a story about being bisexual or pansexual. It just happens to be who they are.
Yep.
Well, that's it. I mean, you know, it was in the blurb for this particular panel. You know, it's not, you're not gay sometimes and
exactly
not gay the rest of the time. You're just
Right.
bi all the time.
Right. Exactly.
So I actually have written a couple of stories that are focused on being bisexual, but I mean, it was a purpose to that within the larger story, and got feedback on that there was too much of, you know, educating people on that. And I'm like, well, again, if everyone understood it, I would not have to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. You've got to normalize. You can normalize it without pointing at it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree with that. That's a great way of putting it, Steve. So avoiding harmful stereotypes. We did kind of touch on that a little bit in our conversation. You know, perpetuating the sex hungry individual, you know, the promiscuous, you know, girl who'll do it with anybody. It's, again, those are all tropes that harm your basic everyday bisexuals and pansexuals like we are. How do we go about, and there's a great question from Tyrone over in the Q&A about how can we use our work to fight biphobia and bi-erasure and pan-erasure and panphobia. So I would like to answer that in saying that it's basically by portraying them the way we do, as they're just people who have normal relationships, and whether or not that fits the sexual fantasy of someone else is not our problem. It's just who we are, and it's who our characters are. So how do you guys feel about that statement?
I don't know if there's anything else to add.
Yeah, I think that's really good.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's just, you know, I say they're people, we're people. We're just people.
We're people. Exactly.
So that's how we have to present it, but we do run into the obvious problems.
Agreed.
I really just try to allow my characters to enjoy the relationships they enjoy, to be the people that they are. And, you know, interestingly enough, so in one of my novels, I have two characters who are both bisexual. I love to write two bisexuals in a relationship. That's just fun. And one of them is, in this particular story, one of them is a white man and one of them is Black. And there's a little bit of miscommunication. And one of the things that I do is I just outright have my Black character state that two things about himself that he is very proud of are he's proud to be a Black man and he is proud to be bisexual. And I felt like that just needed to be on page because it just did. Sometimes you just have to say it. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that was just something that had to be said because we're allowed to be proud of who we are.
Absolutely.
Regardless of what different aspects of ourselves that includes.
And the aspect of, you know, having multiple partners, a lot of bisexuals and pansexuals are polyamorous. Some of us are not. Some of us are serial monogamous and very boring and very vanilla. So how one of those harmful things, the tropes that we see in a lot of books are the evildoers, the ones that are using their bisexuality to pull something over on someone else. So that is, Scott had asked in our questions here, What's the most common mistakes and how should we show readers characters are bi without resorting to the sleeping around, or is just telling their sexuality enough? With the telling, again, I feel like if you just live your character's life out, people will figure that out. You don't have to expressly say, oh, I'm bisexual. You know, the character doesn't have to say that on page. What, in answering his question, what are the most common mistakes that you've seen in writing that perpetuate those negative stereotypes of bisexuality?
Oh Lord. Please do not get me started.
Did I open Pandora's box on this one?
Right. Yeah. So I'm going to limit it to my least favorite trope ever in the history of tropes is the gay for you trope. I hate it. I hate it with a fiery burning passion and would like it to die in a hole because I feel like it is very bi erasive.
Absolutely.
A lot of the time it's just some person who and sometimes people try really hard and then at the end of it they'll be like, oh, and really this person is bisexual. And I'm just going, you know, could we just not with all of it? So that is one thing where if you're not bisexual, please, Lord, don't write the gay for you trope.
Yes, please don't. Please don't. Chloe and Steve, I see you nodding too.
I think for me, it's the whole indecisiveness, the trope of the bisexual, the pansexual person being completely indecisive. They can't decide, they can't make up their minds. And I'm like, and especially if it's put in something like a, you know, love triangle situation, I'm like, can we not though? Can we not? Because like the likelihood of that happening to me just feels so, I mean, yes, like fiction is meant to be, you know, fiction. It's meant to be exploring kind of like a fantasy, I guess, in a sense. But it feels so unrealistic to me as a bi person that you would, you know, put yourself in, that you would be so indecisive between choosing between like a woman that you find really attractive or a non-binary person that you find attractive or a man that you find attractive, that kind of thing. That just feels like so unrealistic to me. And I really despise that trope, the indecisiveness, because I feel like it again relates back to this harmful mentality that bisexual and pansexual people are just experimenting and we don't actually know what we want, when very many of us have, you know, taken the time to think about, you know, our identities and think about our attraction to others and how that relates to ourselves. So that's just something that I absolutely despise seeing, is the indecisive trope. And love triangles between people of multiple genders. I don't like that.
Yeah, I resolved my love triangles with polyamory. So
there we go.
There you go. There you go.
That works. Steve, what were you going to say?
Unfortunately, this is where I have to hold up my hand and say I haven't actually read that many books with queer characters because, you know, I came to this late. So I haven't been looking.
Boy, we got some books for you, Steve.
I know, right? I've got a list.
She's got a very comprehensive list.
So actually,
I
actually want to go back to an earlier point that was just touched on briefly, where you were talking about people declaring whether or not they are bisexual or not. In my fantasy book here, that one, the main character is Ace Arrow, and her mentor is bi. Now, this doesn't really come up a huge amount, except for a couple of notable situations, until the third book, when they're having a heart-to-heart, or the fourth book, I can't remember, where they're having a heart-to-heart because she's confused. He knows what he is. And so they have this long conversation, but they don't have the words. You know, there is no term for what he is. There is no term for what she is, or terms. So it's a couple of pages, maybe a bit more, where he's sort of going over the whole situation, and it literally explains the problem of being bisexual in a book, or indeed in life.
In life, especially. For a long time, I did not have the vocabulary to trust why I felt like there was something wrong with me. You know, why can't I be happy? Why can't I accept the things that make me happy or that turn me on, that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people face that as part of the ongoing negative stereotypes of bisexuality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The good thing is that that's my best-selling book.
That sounds like a wonderful conversation. I'm going to have to read that one.
So I will also add that one other thing that I would prefer that people who are not, if you haven't experienced it as a bisexual person, it is really good to steer away from a lot of drama from the person's partner. Because yes, many of us can experience biphobia from people that we have dated or are, starting a relationship with, or whatever. But I think I like just reading about us as we are embraced and accepted as who we are. Now, I understand that there are some books, and sometimes it works. I have read books where I think it actually does work, but I also feel like that's just something that sometimes gets thrown in there for extra added effect and drama when there are so many other things in life that can cause a rift between people and cause communication problems. That doesn't have to be one of them.
And I don't want to stay away from writing some of the challenges that people face, but at the same time, I don't want to focus on them.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Got another question down here at the bottom. What are some tropes that we do like to include in our stories?
Oh gosh. Okay, so I am a terrible human being, and I really like the secret baby trope. And have written it. Also, I really like age gap. That's one of my favorite things to read. I don't know, I've written some, not a whole lot, but I really like reading age gap stories.
Yeah. I personally love a good childhood friends to childhood friends kind of trope where they grow up and then they fall in love. I'm like a sucker for those kinds of stories. I think that they're so cute, and I think it's what I think the best thing about those tropes is that you get to watch them grow over time, and you get to kind of have that perspective, that context of their past, and have that carry over to their future. So that's a trope that I write a lot, probably more than I should. That's one of my favorites though. Yeah.
Steve, do you have any that you really enjoy writing?
Yeah, well, I seem to do it automatically. I'm not quite sure how it happens, but say found family is something that I do.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yes.
That's my favorite.
And so there's always the main mentioning the other thing is that I tend not to take out anything that will cause conflict. I don't necessarily mention, but as I say, I write steampunk, which means that I'm writing sort of I write late Victorian, early and Edwardian period. And the racism, the sexism, the everything else-ism, all those prejudices, and I have female characters, competent female characters, and they're not necessarily, they face up to these things. I don't make them front and center, but I make them issues that have to be dealt with to some in certain situations. And the other thing, which I literally just thought of, and it's gone. Oh well, never mind. Let's move on.
So we touched on this in our pre-conversations as well. We have someone who is asking how you differentiate between bisexual and pansexual, and Chloe and Ames both had just a very simple way of stating it, and I would like you guys to say that here.
Yeah, for the bisexuality versus pansexuality and why you would identify as, I mean, honestly, to me, it comes down to personal preference. And from other pansexual and bisexual people I met, it comes down to personal preference and what sort of label it is that you're comfortable with using. Yeah.
I think the best conversation I ever had, and I really want to say this because it was so eye-opening. I have a friend who writes some of my favorite bi and pan books, contemporary fantasy that is just wonderful. And we've talked about it, and what it seems to me, so my friend is in spiritual practice as a solitary witch, and they have a very expansive view of the world and a love for creation. And it seems like pansexuality for them just dovetails with their spiritual practices. I am a person who my life is very focused on balance. And so for me, bisexuality fits because it feels like the balance of energies, balance of halves and into a whole. And so for us, it really was literally about our spiritual practices and beliefs. So I kind of feel like that is how a lot of people look at it. And for many of us, we do spend a lot of time wrestling with which labels feel right to us. I know people who also use terms like fluid, omnisexual, polysexual, multisexual. And for each person, a lot of the time it does boil down to what is our whole outlook on all aspects of our lives, and why does this term resonate with us? And for many people, it is honestly about which one you heard first. Also, it can be an age thing. People my age and older tend to identify with bisexual because it's the word that we first heard. It's the word that was very common. And younger people tend to identify with pansexual because that is a word that they are familiar with. So there's so much that goes into that. But the one thing that I have genuinely decided I'm tired of and refuse to engage in is bisexual versus pansexual debates, because that is actually not created by bi and pan people who on the whole tend to get along swimmingly. That's often a debate that is forced on us by people outside of our community who don't understand us and then want to divide us within. I mean, there is really a divide and conquer kind of attitude sometimes, and it's often forced on us by cisgender heterosexual people. So yeah, we're all in this together, and it really does boil down to what just in our hearts feels right to us.
And as you said, people like you and I who are a little bit older, we didn't have the vocabulary that we needed until my oldest came out as transmasculine. I had no clue about how I felt had a name, that other aspects of me. I've also decided I identify as genderqueer. So it's having the vocabulary was so freeing to get that. And whether or not our characters have that vocabulary or it just simply is who they are, I think is kind of unimportant. Again, putting a label on them, unless it's part of their personality, they come out and they, swagger out and they, automatically announced how they identify and who they're going to sleep with, that kind of thing. If they're that out, what's the word I'm looking for? That brash, of a character. So let's see here.
There's one at the bottom about bi male characters.
Yes, yeah, I was going to try and address that. Fewer bi male characters. I have in my book Nectar and Ambrosia, there's a dual POV, dual point of view, one male, one female. And the male character is bisexual, but I've been dismayed to see that portrayed as not gay enough in some of the remarks I've received. So it may be that there are more bi-male characters out there, but if they're currently in a heterosexual relationship, they're automatically erased as bi. So,
Yeah.
so
Well,
as many of us are personally erased as bi if we're in a heterosexual relationship. So that is something that we also face. So
I was thinking about that too. There's
yeah.
actually very few bi-male characters in visual media.
Mhm.
There do tend to be more women, but they also tend to be fetishized.
Yes.
So
Develop for the male gaze.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's
In the media, I can give the only one I can give you is Jack
Jack
Harkness.
Harkness. Yes.
Captain Jack.
He is like the poster child.
There's a great bi-male character on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. And that show is amazing. And there's actually a lot of really, really there's more than one bisexual character, but I don't want to give anything away. Like that one is kind of known from I think it's even it might even be in the first season of it. But the other one is not revealed until later. So I don't want to give spoilers, but there is great bi representation in that show. Also, I found that I can find many more romance books with bi-male characters than I can FF romance with bi-female characters. Just that's been my personal experience, but maybe I'm not reading the right books.
Let's see here. Let's see. This person is a writer doing a ton of research on polyamory, and they would like potential or thoughts on potential pitfalls or things you wish more books included. So Ames, I think you are the one who writes the most on polyamory. So if you want to answer that question.
Sure. So one of the things that I didn't want to do a lot of was writing a lot of, because a pitfall I see in writing is a lot of jealousy when there's a polyamorous romance. And so I like the idea of, well, sometimes people just fall in love. So I have one where I've written polyamory and open relationships, and I've written them in multiple different ways. And my Boston-based series there's only one out of those books that isn't a polyamorous relationship. And interestingly enough, that was the one that was best received. People liked that one best out of the series, which is a little disappointing. But the last book in the series has a polyamorous relationship that is a trans man, a cisgender woman, and they are in a romantic relationship as well as a sexual relationship, and they have a partner who is aromantic, who is a cisgender man, and they are all bisexual, pansexual, all three of them. So I think, I tried to limit jealousy to one of the characters is feeling a little bit left out or feeling like all of his relationships are, he's struggling with other things. So I tried to not emphasize jealousy between the characters. And when there is something where people are feeling those things, I try to include something about them talking through it and working through things and developing healthy patterns in their relationships. Other than that, and I think another one is that we tend to look at polyamory as being like erotica, whereas I write it as both romantic and sexual relationships that are just relationships, that it's not exclusively about one thing or the other. It's a whole picture of the relationship. So I don't know if anyone else has written or read things that you want to speak to that you do or don't like in those.
The main character in my Dali Tamarea novels, they are polyamorous, and their relationship is not necessarily spelled out in the beginning. It's a past thing in the series, but it's just presented very matter-of-factly that they had a husband and a wife, and that they only shared one bed at a time. It wasn't a free-for-all. So it was presented as a very normal thing in this future society, because the females and the males, females have not rebounded as quickly as the male population after a pandemic and a war. And so it's not unusual for a woman to have two husbands. So, and then it kind of goes into this question from Chris Banner too, about representation of characters whose identities or orientations are not well known or understood by mainstream. Dali Tamarea is a third gender human, intersex human, and there's a very large population of intersex human beings in this future civilization. So you handle it by doing a lot of research and not going on what other people have written before you. You need to talk to people who are actually intersex. You need to talk to people who are polyamorous. You need to get a lot of input from the things you do not know firsthand. And that is extremely important to have sensitivity readers if you are not part of those populations, to make sure that what you are doing or saying is not harmful or misrepresenting those populations. Now, I'll have to add a caveat. The science fiction and fantasy part comes in to where my character is able to assume the secondary sexual characteristics of a male or female. They're technically gender neutral. So I have played with that a little bit. It's more of a shifter kind of thing. So I can't say that that is an absolutely spotless portrayal of an intersex human being. So, and Chloe, I see you nodding too.
Oh, yeah, I haven't specifically read a lot of stories about polyamory, but I've definitely read things about more open relationships, or relationships that maybe someone is either navigating their sexuality and they're trying to figure that out while being in a romantic relationship with somebody else, or they are trying to or they're just going through like a lot of other things, and like finalizing a relationship and like declaring it as official is kind of the last thing on their mind. And I think what's definitely important, and what I look for, at least in stories where there's polyamory, where there's open relationships, or even where there's just like messy characters that don't know exactly what it is that they want, I try to look for stories that have more so open communication. And I think that's what's really key, is that I don't want to open up a book and read about how these two people are fighting because one person doesn't necessarily know what they want, or isn't really ready to have like a committed or monogamous relationship, or someone maybe is coming to terms with their polyamorous identity. I don't like to necessarily see like a lot of anger or drama surrounding that. I prefer to read books with stories about people who develop healthy open communication. Yeah.
Yeah, like in one of my books, I have a character who is in a relationship with someone who is already in a relationship, and it's open. Everyone knows everything, but because of the character's past with an abusive ex, he is worried that the other people will be upset. It's not that they will be, they won't. And I chose not to include that drama, but that he needs to be reassured. No, nobody is upset if we're having this relationship. Nobody is, you're welcome as part of our bigger family. And so, but I also made sure that that was included in this open communication, because I too prefer if people talk to each other. It could be a little frustrating unless you're writing a book on purpose where somebody is very immature. um, and that needs to be called out. That person needs to be addressed their immaturity, because otherwise, if you can resolve the problem in a 2-minute conversation, you have not really created a good plot for your story.
Absolutely. Oh, we just got our 10-minute warning. So let's talk about books for a little bit. I'll go really fast and I'll let you guys dominate this. My books are Nectar and Ambrosia. This is the main MC that is bisexual, and there are many other representations in that book. Peacemaker, this is my Dali Tamarea series. This is the most recent one, and my main character is bisexual and intersex. So, and the most recent book I read with pretty good bisexual representation was The Cyborg Tinkerer, which was fun. It was a steampunk novel, Steve, if you're interested in that. And I had a lot of fun reading that. Meg Latore, I think, is the author. My brain is not working on that right now. So again, kind of like Steve, I've kind of struggled to think of books where it was explicitly, a bisexual main character. So, but that was a fun book. And I know Ames, you got a ton of recommendations. And I have a document that I can put in the Discord afterwards that has our recommendations on it. So you want to talk about some of the books your books and also the books that you like?
Okay, I'll do that. Here's some of them. They don't all contain queer characters, but there's usually some in there somewhere. As I said at the beginning, I'm not going to go on about it, because if you go there, you can find all the books. Also a couple by my wife, but they don't contain any queer representation at present, as far as I know. Anyway, but we've also covered the fact that I can't possibly give any recommendations because I haven't read anything. So I'll just pass on to the next person. Ames?
Sure. Yeah, I can go next. Okay, so I am including a link to my books. I primarily write contemporary literature and contemporary romance, but like I mentioned earlier, I've written one YA novella about someone coming into their bisexuality and gender non-binary nature. And my upcoming novel is a time loop in the style of Groundhog Day, time loop novel, romance that bisexual cisgender woman. But I have written my Polyamory bisexual series is my Notes from Boston series. Obviously that is set in Boston and it's about musicians. I have my Faithfully Yours series, which is about a person who previously thought himself gay and then ended up in a relationship with somebody who is non-binary and ultimately realized his bisexuality. And then I have a bunch of standalones, and everything I write has bisexual people in it because that's what I do. And as for recommendations, you'll see some of those should be listed in the document that'll be in Discord, but I cannot recommend highly enough my very, very, very favorite fantasy series with bisexual, pansexual, and non-binary people is the Appalachian Elementals by Jean Jafellers. And
good.
Yeah, so good. So good. They are an amazingly talented writer, and the books are wonderful. There's 3 books and a novella or short story, a short work in that series. And the first one in that is called Cleaning House. So just absolutely amazing stories. They are contemporary fantasy set in Appalachia. And you just have to read them.
I agree. Second that.
And then I have written mostly, I have one full-length novel which released last year, which is Duality. That's the first in a trilogy, so definitely you can pick it up if you would like, and if you're interested. It is about kind of jumping between dimensions, and it's got a very, I will say she is definitely an irritating protagonist, and I kind of wrote her with that way of being intentionally kind of like a messy bit of a character. But I really enjoy her, and I really enjoy kind of the saga that's going to come along with that. And I've written a couple of novellas too. I've written Stations of Life, which is about a queer women who are kind of, they end up on a train that travels through their past. And it's about how one has to kind of look at her past in order to understand her present to save her relationship with the other. And then I've also written 3 a.m., which is not sci-fi, but it is just kind of like a realistic fiction story, kind of about exploring trauma and grief and how that has impacted the kind of relationship between these two best friends who grew up together. So those are available. You can find links to them on my website, and you can also find links to them on the Amazon author page. Those or you can find them as well. So
Awesome. So we're winding down here. So I know, Ames, you did a reading today.
Mhm.
And Chloe, you and I are in the same reading block tomorrow. Is that noon tomorrow?
I think so. Let me.
I can't remember. I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember Central Time.
Yeah, it's Central Time. Let me see here. So it's Central Time tomorrow. Yes, it is at noon tomorrow. Yes.
Okay, so Chloe and I'll be reading from our works tomorrow. And Steve, are you going to be reading anything on any panels?
No, unfortunately,
No.
I didn't get a booking, but I also have certain issues at the moment, which mean I can't talk for long periods of time.
Oh, I understand. All righty. Okay, well, this has been so much fun. I guess we'll probably be continuing in the Discord if anybody has any other questions that were not addressed during the presentation. But thank you so much, and thank you so much to the Rainbow Space Magic people. You guys are fantastic. This is the best. So
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.
thank you.